Hi, everyone. My name is Farah Morali, and welcome to this panel discussion. We're just about to get started, but I'm going to wait about a minute or so to allow folks who are just logging on now to get sorted. Maybe some people are hopping on from other panel events, and we will get underway shortly. All right, we're gonna get started here. First off, a very warm welcome to you all. My name is Farah Morali. I'm a reporter with CBC News. Thanks so much for joining this panel discussion called "The Changing Face of the Workplace: How the World of How We Work Could Change Forever." It's of course part of this year's Ignite digital event. 20 months ago, we were thrust into this sort of sea of uncertainty in so many ways. I can still remember watching press conference on TV when a provincial state of emergency was declared, and we were suddenly told that our everyday tasks could put us and others at risk. We were told to stay at home as much as possible, and COVID-19, of course, was declared a global pandemic. For many of us, it felt like overnight our entire professional lives took a 180. The commutes to work, the actual office, meetings, everything kind of dissolved, and we began this task of figuring out how to do our jobs remotely. It was scary for a lot of us. I know for me, it really was comforting, maybe for others, but it's hard to believe that it's been 20 months of this. We've watched a lot of businesses adapt and grow. Some of them have taken new forms altogether. We've also seen some businesses fold, unable to kind of sustain the heavy blows of the pandemic. So much has changed. Since then, we've learned a lot about the tasks we do every day, how we do them. There's a lot of questions. Will we ever go back to the traditional office model? And if we do, how will it look different? Has this transition to remote working impacted some more than others? So what we're here to talk about on this panel is really what's next. I know some of us have been given directions or an understanding of what their jobs are going to look like in the coming months. Some perhaps are already back in a sort of office scenario. Some are still waiting to hear from their employers, or about what they're going to do. It's this kind of weird, wonderful transition phase where it feels like the pandemic is waning, but there's still a lot of uncertainty for many people of what their professional lives are going to look like. So it's my great pleasure to be your moderator today to facilitate what I hope is going to be a really thoughtful discussion on something that's been on a lot of our minds for a really long time now. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce our panelists for today. We're going to start with Dr. Salima Bhimani. She is the Chief Strategist and Director of Equity and Inclusion and Systemic Change at Google. And our other panelist is Nadine Spencer. She's the CEO of Brand EQ Group, Inc. It is a global marketing and communications agency that specializes in marketing, communications, and public relations. Welcome, Salima and Nadine. Really, really excited to have you both here for this discussion.
Yeah, thanks for having us. We're glad to be here.
It's great to be part of this amazing group of women.
So maybe as a way for our participants to get to know you a bit, perhaps we can start with talking about sort of those early months of the pandemic, what that looked like for you. I know maybe we can ask, or I can ask you what the one biggest challenge you faced while trying to do your job. I can get us warmed up. As many people know, I work as a reporter. And really for me, it was this sort of combination of suddenly having to learn new technology and do my job remotely with daily deadlines. So on a daily basis, I file a television story and I file a radio story. And we have strict deadlines. You don't meet those deadlines, your story doesn't go to air. It's not something you can just pick up the next day. So all of a sudden, we were sort of asked to do everything from home. Gone was the sort of the glorious newsroom where we could do everything easily. We could screen our footage easily. We could cut radio stories fast or run into a recording booth to record our voices. Suddenly, my bedroom closet became the kind of impromptu recording booth with like 3 bathrobes over my head. And, the technology was a challenge with that as well. In that, think of a technology you've used at your job for years and years and years, and it's great and it works well. Suddenly we were asked to use sort of a similar but different technology with the workflow that was 3 times as slow, but still kind of doing the same tasks within the same amount of time. So yeah, I mean, there wasn't a time to adjust. There was still a newscast to fill every day, a lot of mistake making. But yeah, that was really the biggest challenge. That and trying to keep my cat away from the camera while interviewing politicians, which happened a little bit more often than I would like. But yeah, no, curious to know, maybe we'll start with you, Salima. What was sort of the one biggest challenge you initially faced while trying to do your job at Google when things sort of shifted?
Yeah, I mean, my work is so relationship based, and working with the other bets, which are basically like moonshot companies of Alphabet, and everything I do is about connection and being, and so far being in person and building those connections, whether it's talking to a CEO or talking to, the head of HR or talking to other employees. Like, I think so much of it was, hey, I can be in person, we can get to know each other, we can look into each other's eyes, we can read each other's energy, I can figure out very quickly when I'm in the room with somebody, how uncomfortable are they with the conversation we're just having? How comfortable aren't they? And so I think that was a huge transition for me. And I know for people who value in person, it was, I think, psychologically really tough to make that switch. Also because I think people, not everybody, but a lot of people value even the informal interactions that happen, right? So you're in the office and you're walking down the hall and someone's like, hey, I have a question for you. And you stop and you have this conversation. Or it's like, hey, I'm going to lunch. Do you want to come with me? So, all of those things dissipate. And then all of a sudden you're in this virtual environment, which, I mean, I'm not going to say it was completely new to me, but what I will say is that it really did bring into question, how do you continue to build those authentic relationships in this environment when you're missing a lot of those social cues that you get when you're in person? So I don't know that it was, it felt challenging to me personally because that's how I'm oriented in my work. But I also think it did challenge the work itself.
Yeah, no, those are some excellent points. Really, communication, connection, just kind of, just changed the way we did all of that. What about you, Nadine? What were some of the or what was maybe the one biggest challenge that you faced in that sort of those initial few months of the transition to remote working?
Yeah, I mean, I think I can relate very much to what Salima has said. We live in the world of warm and fuzzy, and in the relationship building, the warm and fuzzy is such a big part of it. And that just did not exist anymore. My daughter always says, Mom, read the room. That's a big part of what we do all the time is read the room. Okay. So how do we now read a room in this virtual environment as we're doing right now? So, one of the things for me, I in the frame up on the Zoom like we're doing today, the shocker of it was just at the very beginning, like there was no lighting, there was none of that. And not only that, a lot of people didn't have technology. We didn't have technology as we imagined that we're here today. And it was easy for us to just jump on. But a lot of the individuals that we work with in the Black community, especially looking at Black youth, they never had this. They never had the luxury of this. So we were really, really disconnected. So it was really to look at how then do we get this group of individuals online like everybody else, so they can also be connected and be part of this new normal, this new conversation, and this new connectedness that was missing from them. So I think that was one of the biggest challenges for us, for me anyway, was to have that connection that was missing. That we all took for granted that, we're here and we're able to, connect together and see one another. But a lot of the people that we served didn't have that. So there was no warm and fuzzy at all.
Yeah. I was just gonna say, I love what you're saying, Nadine, because it reminds me of how the pandemic has really showed us the disparity of that people have and exacerbated those disparities. So whether it's the digital divide or whether it's something else. So I really appreciate what you're saying, because it surfaces all of the sort of historical inequities, right, that communities have faced, yeah. Black, brown, other communities have faced. And it makes you realize how inaccessible it was to begin with, right? And now, oh my gosh, it's even more inaccessible. And so what do we do with that reality? And I think we were confronted by that on so many fronts.
Yes.
Yeah. I'm really glad that you brought that up, Nadine and Salima, because I think a lot of these discussions are framed around the assumption that, even what you had brought up, Nadine, the fact that access to technology, that we're all, able to connect
Exactly.
through Zoom or internet, or that we're all, have a sort of a certain home life where we can allow these conversations, or the ability to even work from home is even possible. So I think that's an important part of the discussion. I do want to touch on sort of equity and sort of solutions for the transition to work in a little bit as well. But I wonder if maybe we can sort of, going back to Nadine, you're obviously a CEO of a big company, and I imagine that you kind of had this very interesting sort of bird's eye view of what was working and what wasn't working in this sort of transition from work to home. I wonder if there are any sort of changes that, or things that changed in this initial transition from work to home that you think you're going to be bringing in permanently. Were there things that you kind of identified as a manager, as a CEO, that sort of you think you're going to be eliminating, or things that worked you realized you didn't really need, or things that were superfluous, or changes that you think the pandemic introduced that you're going to keep as we sort of go through this transition phase?
Yeah, one of the things I recognize and I actually love about this pandemic is the fact that we're now more innovative than we were before. All the big plans that we had, that we thought, oh, we'll do that next year or 3 years from now, we'll implement them years from now. We had to implement them immediately. And so, we have our team members that always wanted to sort of, work in their own environments. And we were sort of, are they really going to deliver in those environments when they're at home? And it's proved us wrong. As a team, we looked at our group, and people are delivering. Not only are they delivering, but they're implementing, and they're happier because they can do it whenever they choose. If they feel inspired at 3 a.m., they can do the work at 3 a.m. And as long as the deadlines are met, we're okay with that. So our team members are happier, the work is getting done, and no one's in the office. And because no one's in the office, we've now moved into is creating a studio for media training. So when people come in, it's just them alone, and because we don't need the big space anymore because the team is now working at home. So it's given us that edge to be more innovative and having happier team members producing great work, inspired work out of this. So it's been a very positive thing.
It's really interesting that you mentioned that, because I know there's been so many discussions, about lessons learned from this pandemic and remote working, about allowing employees to sort of take more control over their schedules. I know obviously for a job like mine, I will have daily deadlines, and that's not going to happen. But for a lot of people who have sort of a daily list of duties that need to be fulfilled, why not give employees more control over their schedules? Salima, do you think that that's something that companies should shift towards, or do you think that's sustainable?
Yeah, I mean, it's great to hear, Nadine, from you from the CEO perspective, because in my experience, I think one of the things that I'm finding is that CEOs and executives are going to have to do a lot of introspection about why they're making the choices that they're making, whether it is, hey, we're going to go completely remote, or we're going to be hybrid, or we're going to do something else. And I'm finding in a lot of the conversations that people are anchoring on what they still know, right? So the assumption that, like, hey, in order for me to build a culture at a company, that maybe I built that culture by actually having certain things in the office, or by making sure that certain meetings are always happening, we're always together, to then saying, okay, now we actually have to think again about how do we build a culture within an organization. I'm finding that leaders are actually having a hard time with that, quite frankly, because it is a new norm, right? So if we're only anchoring towards, and I think we should be anchoring towards outcomes, right? So I don't care how you get your hot job done, right? Allow yourself to have the creative freedom to figure that out. But let's look at the outcomes that you produce. Amazing. And then how do you build a company culture, especially for organizations and CEOs where that has looked a certain way historically? So I'm finding that shift means your leadership approach actually has to change. And that, I don't know that that's easy. I actually am finding that people are having a hard time. It feels like a bit of a climb for folks, right? So theoretically, they know, hey, we just spent the last 2 years, whatever, it's been 20 months, doing this work, and pretty much people have, let's say, been producing. But now I'm like, oh, wait, now I have the opportunity to bring people back, potentially, supposedly. And do I do that? And if I don't do that, then how do I even be a leader in this new environment, right? So I definitely think that there's there is a learning curve for executives and for leaders as well on what this is looking like and why it would look one way or the other.
Yeah, and you know, I love what you said, Salima, because when you talk about the learning curve and how do you build, we have to build culture in a different way. That's one of the things we've done, and it's ironic because here we've got these. We just ordered these for our team, right?
What?
So we have these boss women sweats. And so in this environment, how do you build a culture? How do you get the warm and fuzzy when you can't see people and all of that? So we have these items that we all wear together. We have lunch together. We have coffee together. We send packets out. And that's just the way of bringing in the humanness and connectedness in this environment that can seem so desolate, if you will, and estranged. But we do these little things to bring in that culture, to continue that human touch and human vibe and value to one another.
Yeah, I mean, that kind of, that's been part of the whole sort of challenge when we're talking about, you know, remote working is keeping that sense of closeness, that culture. You know, you bringing out that sweatshirt's a great example of something that, you know, a way to make people feel more connected. But I'm curious to hear your thoughts on, you know, whether, you know, it sounds like, you know, obviously it varies across the spectrum, but a lot of discussions are being had in workplaces about hybrid models where there is still sort of an element of working from home. Is there a way to sort of to reimagine or replace the sort of face-to-face interactions? You know, I'm thinking in my job, you know, which is a creative job, so much of it is I'm trying to look for a word for a story in a sentence, and my neighbor pops in or chimes in, or I need to check a pronunciation and somebody across the room yells it over to me. And it's such a collaborative process in my job. And you really can't have that even in a hybrid model of you know, of remote working. You know, are there things that companies should be thinking about to sort of reimagine face-to-face collaboration? I know obviously Zoom is not quite the same as these sort of, you know, spurring creativity as face-to-face is. Yeah, maybe Salima can pick up on that.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I think we've taken innovation for granted in-person spaces. So what I mean by that, we've assumed that it's by being in person, you're going to be innovative. I'm not convinced about that. I think you have to be very intentional about being innovative and very intentional about creating collaborative spaces. And I've seen a lot of people play out collaboration that's really not collaboration, even though it's in person, right? So I think for me, it's a critical moment to really think about what does honest and authentic collaboration look like? And when does that need to be in person? And when can that be hybrid, right? Or what does innovation require of us? And in order for that innovation to happen, when does that need to be in person, and when can that be hybrid, or when can that be from home? So I think the moment is actually asking us to reflect on our former practices, to say, were we really getting out of it what we thought we were, and how does this opportunity give us a space to really reimagine both the in-person and the not in-person piece of it. And one thing I talk to managers about and leaders about is that, you know, part of this is also making sure that people feel valued in those moments, right? Because collaboration and innovation, I mean, great if those things are the things that you want to anchor on, but if people don't feel valued in their contribution towards those things, then that's the thing that I'm worried about, right? So be intentional and then make sure that people feel valued in the contribution that they're making. And let's be clear to them that whether you're sitting at home or whether you're in the office, you're not going to get evaluated differently for it, right? You're going to be valued across the board. So those are, I think, the big things that come up for me.
Yeah. And you know what I've seen in the hybrid model, which I think is quite innovative. I look at, you know, women, especially women of color, and one of the things that they're reporting is that they don't experience the same aggressions as they would in person. So they're happy to be working in a remote environment, and they feel more empowered working in a remote environment, because they're where they might be challenged in terms of lack of confidence in expressing themselves in person. In this remote environment, they feel more empowered. For some reason, they feel more empowered in the seat, in their own space. Maybe the comfort of being in their own space empowers them to speak up more, to articulate their wishes for themselves, and maybe the strength of their family behind them in this hybrid model gives them more power. They're more empowered. And so I think that's quite brilliant. And as leaders, how do we interpret that? We then now have to recognize the value that our employees bring to the table and just listening. And now when I look at women and they're working and the baby's in their hand, I think, how wonderful is this? And that wouldn't have happened in an in-person environment. And so it enables a new mom to still contribute and feel self-fulfilled while she's nurturing and caring for her family. And I think that's one of the wonderful things that has come out of these new hybrid environments that we're seeing today. And really, I hope we never go back to the space where people have to come in and they bring all the stresses and challenges that we have in an environment, that if we're empowered from being in our own space, I think that's a great thing. And I mean, in our organizations and in a lot of organizations that I work with, we fully support that.
Yeah. Can I add something prior to that? Yeah, Didi, I think that you're bringing up such a good point. And some other aspects that I wanted to add to what you were saying is, when you actually look at the research is quite mixed around hybrid work, right? So even for women, Black folks, brown folks, LGBTQ folks, you actually see that what the research is indicating is, and it's also generational, by the way, is that some women are actually double tasked from working from home. So there's women who are like, yeah, this gives me more space to bring myself to work, but other women are like, no, I'm doing quadruple time now. So I'm like taking care of the child that's actually running across the floor right now while I'm doing this work, while I'm doing the housework. So actually, when you look at the research, the anxiety and the stress has gone up for women in the workforce. So again, I think that environments and organizations are going to have to be very intentional about what inclusion and what equity mean when it comes to making sure that we're mitigating those things. I also think that when we look at the research around LGBTQ folks, a lot of them are worried about not outing themselves because they haven't outed themselves to their bosses. So they kind of are conscious of their environment and how much of the environment, the home environment, do they show, or code switching. A lot of Black folks talk about code switching, right? And how much code switching you have to do when you're in work, but also the code switching you have to do here. It gets better when you're in your own environment, right? Because you don't have to code switch in the same way. And I know that he's shaking her head, but yeah, it's exactly. And at the same time, I think for me, the thing I keep reminding these organizations is that, and all the folks that I work with, is that, just because we've created this new environment where people are saying they're more comfortable does not mean that you shouldn't be dealing with the issues that are in your company. Because if people are saying they're staying home so they don't have to deal with microaggressions, that's a problem. It means you have microaggressions. And by the way, it doesn't get corrected by the fact that we're sitting on Zoom. It just doesn't, right? It's still there. We've just figured out other ways to navigate it. So for me, I think it's yes, and it's yes to everything that you said, Nadine, and there are other things that we need to be really thinking about in order to create a more equitable and inclusive hybrid situation for everybody that attends to these historical things and current, I think, issues that are coming up.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think, when we talk about the future of work and the changing face of work, it's recognizing that, for some, this will be great. And for others, they thrive on the in-person office work environment. And it's that balance.
Yeah, no, those are great points. And I think you're absolutely right, Salima, and this sort of inward looking, this that needs to happen from the highest level in terms of, everything that you described. It's not as black and white as it is. And there's been so many discussions about, the pandemic's impact on women. You alluded to, Nadine, the idea of women being more comfortable working from home, having these options. There's always also those studies that talk about the fact that a lot of women initially in the early stages of the pandemic took leave from their work or left their work because they simply couldn't manage not having childcare and being they became the default caretaker in their situations. I'm wondering, as we sort of talk about this transition back to for some people back to the office, for some people hybrid models, how we sort of, hear the concerns that you talked about, Salima, and what you talked about, Nadine, how we sort of, what managers need to be cognizant of as we make decisions, particularly for when it comes to ensuring that there's equity for women who have been, impacted by a lot of these work from home remote transitions.
Yeah, I mean, I think what we as leaders have to be cognizant of is, addressing each and every person in terms of what their needs are. I can't imagine that every person in our office, that I speak for every person in our office, if one person chooses to work from home, that, it works for everybody else. I think that's the number one thing we have to be cognizant of, and being open to meeting those needs as they arise for each person and each woman specifically. In our office, we have someone, she just had a baby. She wants to be home and she's happy to be at home, but we also have other people that want to come back to the office. And so how is it in this new environment where no one's there, where they're coming back to work with 2 or 3 people? So it's sort of finding that medium between the ones who aren't coming back and are staying away. But also, one of the conversations we've had in one of our organizations is, especially the women of color who do have the micro and macro aggression that we talk about, is, to Salima's point, we have to fix the environment. We don't just say it's okay, you're going to stay home because, we don't want to deal with it. So organizations, are working to fix those environment. And some of the work that we do, we have a division called Brand EQ Black, and we work with organizations to talk about race and to talk about what our employees and our team members are experiencing, and how do we address those issues, which are very serious, so we can come back to a full functioning workforce where people feel valued, empowered, and feel that they can contribute and are respected in the work environment.
Speaking of work environment, Salima, I wanted to sort of, I know Google was initially sort of one of the companies that was very quick to allow its employees to work from home. It's now very quick to sort of call employees back, but there have been all sorts of changes, as I understand it, in like the post-pandemic work environment to allow workers to feel more comfortable, more productive in the environment. I'm wondering if you might be able to talk about some of those things. I know there are a lot of people watching that are sort of looking for ideas for how to make this transition easier, and it really sounds like Google's gone above and beyond with that.
Yeah, I mean, I think like any technology company and Google historically has been, part of the glory of Google, if you will, is their office spaces. Like they were office spaces that were not just office spaces, right? They were like community spaces and cultural spaces, and so Google's very famous for that, and it's part of the perks for employees, right? Is to be in that kind of environment. So I definitely think like the culture of Google was built based on space and in person, and so I think it's been a transition for Google and many other technology companies to think about, well, again, how do we continue to build who we are in this new space? And so, there are definitely, the model is, I mean, you're going to have to talk to every single team because it's slightly different, but in general, they're saying, hey, some days in the office, some days out of the office is fine, and then managers and teams are making those determinations between like, hey, if I'm building a technology and I need to be in the office 5 days a week, then I need to be in the office 5 days a week to build that technology, right? But if I'm doing something else and it doesn't require that, then hey, can I work remotely? So I think the idea has been, how do you be flexible that really tries to attend to what the job is, what the job requires of people, and then meeting people there and saying, okay, then what does that look like for our team? So I think that there is a consciousness and awareness that the sameness model is not going to apply. Like the idea that everybody should actually be following the same criteria and should follow the same principles is, I think that's of the past. Now we're in a more dynamic space where the conversations have to be more dynamic about what the jobs require, what people require, and then how do you meet somewhere in the middle?
Yeah, it sounds like there's been a lot of innovation too, even just on the physical space with the sort of building of outdoor spaces like I'd heard something about meeting rooms that had the sort of screens at eye level with people sitting down, so you kind of feel like you're part of the same discussions. And I'm sure some of those certainly, help when, especially this idea of connection and communication and face-to-face interaction that you've talked so much about.
Yeah.
I did want to talk about sort of as we sort of make this transition, I guess, right? I mean, there's a lot of people who are kind of hovering in the in-between right now. Perhaps they've started a hybrid, maybe they're still working entirely from home, they're adapting to a new office, things like that. As we sort of come to a conclusion here, I'm wondering if maybe I could sort of get your perspectives from, Nadine from a CEO's perspective, Salima from your perspective as somebody who works in diversity and inclusion, really what are the most important things to sort of keep in mind, or your advice, I guess, you would have for people as they're navigating this challenging time. Maybe Nadine, we'll start with you, as a CEO, what advice would you give other CEOs, other managers who are trying to navigate these next few difficult months that lie ahead?
Yeah, see how we can set up our team members for success. One of the things we've done, we've bought everyone new chairs, new ergonomic chairs. As they're sitting in their office, they're comfortable. We have the lighting, we have the fun stuff. I think we have to have the fun stuff. And then we also send every once in a while at Thanksgiving, we sent pies. We sent, really brought the human touch for our team members, and just making sure they're good. And you know what? In this age of technology, where we're all on Zoom and we're all doing emails, every so often, let's have a phone call. Just, hey, Farah, how are you? Hi, Salima, how are you? Just a conversation on an ongoing basis. And just listen, just listen.
Those are some great words of advice. Salima, from your perspective, what advice do you give to employees? We've talked a lot about a lot of issues that people are going through, bigger systemic issues within a workplace environment. It's a difficult time for a lot of people. What advice would you give to folks who are kind of navigating these weird times?
Yeah, I mean, I think for leaders and managers, what I would say is, actually people are working more than they were before in this pandemic world, like sitting virtually. I hear people, the burnout is real. We see that from the research. I hear it all the time. People are burnt out, right? So I definitely think that there's going to have to be, again, some intentional choices around how are people going to separate work from home, and what is that going to look like if people are going to choose to stay at home and work. Again, that might be their choice. That might be the setup in the organization, either way. So I think that that's definitely one thing. I also think that one of the things that I think is really important is how are we making these decisions, right? So like if companies are saying, hey, you can work from home, are we ensuring, like, how are we thinking about compensation then, right? Does your compensation change because of that? Are you going to get evaluated differently because of that? How are managers going to evaluate somebody when in the past, maybe the thing that they were looking at, which was probably wrong, was like, hey, how many times are you in the office and how hard are you working at your desk? Does it look like you're working at your desk? Versus now I can't see you, right? And I have to believe that you are actually going to produce. So I think that there's some fundamental questions that managers and leaders have to ask. And I think for employees, what we're actually seeing is a more empowered employee base, right? Where people are saying, actually, this doesn't work for me and this works for me. Or saying, hey, I can go to a company that's going to give me hybrid versus not. So I think employers have to start to realize that employees feel like they have more choices, quite frankly. The field is more open for the labor force. And so that means that companies are going to have to adapt and think about who do we want to attract and who do we want to retain. And when it comes to underrepresented folks, that's a big issue, right? Because a lot of companies do not retain them, right? And have historically taken that for granted. And now I think they're going to have to really think about it. They should have been thinking about it, but they're not going to really think about it, quite frankly. If you're interested in increasing representation and you want to retain those folks, well, you might have to do things differently.
No, those are important questions that need to be asked as we make this transition. I'm really glad that you brought those up, Salima. I think that is where we will leave our discussion for today. Thank you both so much for joining us, and to all of our participants for watching this panel discussion, which was the changing face of the workplace, how the world of how we work could change forever. I hope you're able to tune in for other Ignite digital events being held. And I'm Farah Morali. Thanks so much for your time.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.